Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today we continue with the theme of the Cold War, but today we're going to talk about the social aspect, the home front, if you will, of what life was like in during the Cold War in these countries. So let's get started. Oh, all right. Starting a new chapter. So, put the chapter title up at the top and when it loads. There you go. In the upper part of your margin, put Life During the Cold War, chapter 15. And then today we're looking at life in these countries, these areas, these regions, Western Europe and North America. Chapter 15, lesson one. That was your warm up. Today, our objectives are comparing and contrasting domestic policies of Western European countries between 1945 and 1989. Summarize the social and political issues the U.S. faced during the 60s and 70s, and draw conclusions how Western society changed during the Cold War. So we might have discussed the big three, if you will, in the last video. Um, but now we're going to take a skirt back up, and now we're going to look at life at not just what was happening with war, but also now back at home. So, one man's show. With economic aid of the Marshall Plan, the countries of Western Europe recovered relatively rapidly from the devastation of World War II, and by 1915, industrial output in Europe was 30% above pre-war levels. One man, the war hero Charles de Gaulle, dominated the history of France for nearly a quarter of the century after the war. In 1946, de Gaulle helped establish a new government, the Fourth Republic, but it was largely ineffective. In 1958, leaders of the Fourth Republic, frightened by bitter divisions caused a crisis in the French colony of Algeria, asked de Gaulle to form a new government. That year, de Gaulle drafted a constitution for the Fifth Republic that enhanced the power of the president. The French president would now have the right to choose the prime minister, dissolve parliament, supervise defense and foreign policy. The French voters approved this constitution, and de Gaulle, DG, de Gaulle, became the first president of the Fifth Republic. Now, if you recall, all the way back to the French Revolution and the First Republic and the Second Republic and the Third Republic, all back towards that time. As president, de Gaulle wanted France to be a world power again, and to achieve this, de Gaulle invested heavily in nuclear arms. France exploded its first nuclear bomb in 1960. That's Charles de Gaulle. Let me sip some coffee because I can't talk. That's Eisenhower and de Gaulle. To the left. So during de Gaulle's presidency, the French economy grew at an annual rate of 5.5%, faster than the rate of the growth in the United States. France became a major industrial producer and exporter, especially of automobiles and weapons. Nevertheless, problems still remained. Large government deficits and a high rise in the cost of living led to unrest in 1968. A series of student protests was followed by a general labor strike. If you know anything about 1968, that's a big year. Discouraged, de Gaulle resigned from office in April 1969, and he died within the year. In the 70s, a deteriorating economic situation caused a political shift to the left. By 1981, the socialists had gained power in the National Assembly. Socialist Francois Mitterrand was elected president. He initiated a number of measures to aid workers: an increased minimum wage, a 39-hour work week, and higher taxes for the rich. The socialist government also nationalized, took over major banks, the steel industry, space and electronics industry, and insurance firms, because that's what socialism does. Socialist policies largely failed to work, and France's economy decline continued. In the elections of 1993, the Socialists only won 28% of the vote. A coalition of conservative parties gained 80% of the seats in the National Assembly. So, Da, da, da. That was France. So you have Charles Bonaparte, Charlemagne, Charles the 16th. That's de Gaulle resigning. The death of de Gaulle. That's what's his name? I forget his name. Da-da-da. Francois Mitterrand. That's him. All right, economic miracle. So now we're going to go to Germany. The three western zones of Germany were unified into the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, 1949. From 1949 to 1963, a man named Konrad Adenauer, leader of the Christian Democratic Union, served as chancellor. Christian Democratic Union is a political party. Adenauer sought respect for West Germany as he cooperated with the United States and other Western European nations, especially France and Germany's longtime rival. Under Adenauer, West Germany experienced an economic miracle. This revival of West German economy was largely guided by the Minister of Finance, Ludwig Erhard. Unemployment fell from 8% in 1950 to 0.4% in 1965. Adenauer will resign in 1963, and Erhard succeeded him as chancellor and largely continued his politics. An economic downturn in the mid-60s brought the Social Democratic Party into power in 1969. Social Democrats, a moderate socialist party, were led by Willy Brandt, mayor of West Berlin. So he's got some pull. In December 1972, Brandt signed a treaty that led to greater contact between East and West Germany. Economic, cultural, and personal ties between the countries were stronger as a result, and for his efforts, Brandt received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1971. Remember, West Germany, East Germany, and Berlin, right? Berlin was communist. That's Konrad Adenauer. That's Erhard, SPD. You got some socialists, Socialist Democratic Party, of course, Mr. Karl Marx. And that's, what's his name? Brandt. Willy Brandt. All right. Britain now. So by the end of World War II, left Great Britain with massive economic problems, as we know. In elections held immediately after the war, the Labour Party overwhelmingly defeated Churchill's Conservative Party. So Churchill was only chosen to lead the country during World War II. The new leader, Clement Attlee, new prime minister. The Labour government set out to create a modern welfare state where the government takes responsibility for providing citizens with services and a minimal standard of living. 1946, the new government passed the National Insurance Act and the National Health Service Act. The Insurance Act provided government funds to help the unemployed, the sick, and the aged. The Health Act created a system of socialized medicine that ensured medical care for everyone. Woo! The British welfare state became the first norm for most European states after the war. Continuing economic problems brought the Conservatives back into power between 1951 and 1964. Although they favored free enterprise, Conservatives accepted the welfare state and extended it by financing ambitious building programs to improve British housing. Again, that's what socialists do. That's Clement Attlee. Help them find their job. Vote the Labour Party. And you got people going to work. Thatched. Between 1964 and 1978, power alternated in between Great Britain's Conservative and Labour Party. In 1979, the Conservatives came to power under the leadership of Margaret Thatcher, Britain's first female prime minister. If they can do that in 1979, good for them. Thatcher pledged to limit social welfare, restrict union power, and end inflation. Her main focus was privatization. Although she did not eliminate the basic social welfare system, Thatcher broke the power of the labor unions and controlled inflation. Thatcherism, as her economic policy was termed, improved the British economic situation, but it came at a price. Business investment and the number of small businesses increased substantially. The south of England prospered, but old industrial areas elsewhere were beset by high unemployment, poverty, and violence. Thatcher would dominate British politics in the 80s, but her popularity fell in 1990 and she resigned as prime minister. So she was prime minister for basically 10 years. Crazy. That's Margaret Thatcher. I think that's a young Margaret Thatcher. All right. So, welcome to the EEC, dudes. The destructiveness of the two world wars caused many thoughtful Europeans to consider the need for some form of European unity. National feeling was still too powerful for European nations to give up their political sovereignty. As a result, the desire for unity was focused chiefly on the economic arena, not political. 1957, France, West Germany, and the Benelux countries, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Italy signed a Rome Treaty. This treaty created the European Economic Community, EEC, or it was known as the Common Market. The EEC was a free trade arena made up of 6 member nations. These 6 nations would impose no tariffs or import charges on each other's goods. However, as a group, they would be protected by tariffs imposed on goods from non-EEC nations. This way, the EEC encouraged cooperation among the member nation economies. So by the 60s, the EEC became an important trading bloc, which is a group of nations with a common purpose. In 1973, Britain, Denmark, and Ireland joined. With a total population of 165 million, the EEC was the world's largest exporter and purchaser of raw materials. By 1986, Spain, Portugal, and Greece became members, and by 1992, the European Economic Community, comprised of 344 million people, was the largest single trading bloc. Welcome to the EAC, dudes. Look at that. I put another GIF in. That's the European Economic Community meeting. In green, you have members as of 1967. In 1973, the blue. 1981, the purple. And then 1986, the turquoise. Notice Eastern Europe, not in it. New Deal, but still a big deal. Between 1945 and 1970, the ideals of FDR's New Deal largely dominated the patterns of American domestic politics. The New Deal brought basic changes to American society, increased the role and power of the federal government, the rise of organized labor, the beginning of a welfare state, and the realization of the need to deal with the concerns of minorities, especially African Americans. This New Deal tradition in American politics was reinforced with the election of Democratic presidents, Harry Truman in 1948, John F. Kennedy in 1960, and Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964. Even in the election of a Republican president, Dwight D. Eisenhower in 52 and 56 did not change the basic direction of the New Deal. And then an economic boom followed World War II. A shortage of consumer goods left during the war left Americans with extra income and the desire to buy goods. After the war, the growth of labor unions brought higher wages, gave more workers the ability to buy consumer goods. Between 1945 and 1973, real wages grew about an average of 3% a year, the most prolonged advance ever in American history. So these are the presidents since FDR. FDR, I know it's pixelated, but there's Harry Truman. He's the guy that dropped the bomb. That's Dwight D. Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, and his vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson. Scary red, trippy red. Prosperity was not the only characteristic described in the early 1950s in America. Cold War struggles abroad led to widespread fear that communists had infiltrated the United States. The climate of fear produced a dangerous political agitator, Senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy. His charges that hundreds of supposed communists were in high government positions helped create a massive Red Scare, which is a fear of communist subversion. When McCarthy attacked the communist conspirators in the U.S. Army, he would be condemned by the U.S. Senate in 1954. And very quickly, his anti-communist crusade came to an end. So during the 50s, there's this very much suspicion that communists from Russia, Soviet Union, are infiltrating our movies and theater, and then they put on these hearings and investigations that largely have no weight, no evidence. And when he then attacks the U.S. military, oh boy, does he fall from grace. So, the red iceberg, again, these are all these communist countries. The red menace is real. Report all suspected communist activity. You'll get a lot more of this next year in world U.S. history, but just know that's John McCarthy. Civil rights. So again, while all that Cold War stuff in Korea and Vietnam is going on, Berlin airlift, Berlin Wall, okay, we're also going through the civil rights movement here. So in August 1963, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., leader of a movement for racial equality, led a march on Washington, D.C. to dramatize the African American desire for equality. King's march and his impassioned plea for racial equality had an electrifying effect on the American people. By the end of 1963, a majority of American people called for civil rights for as the most significant national issue at the time. After the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson will become president. Following his landslide victory in 1964, Johnson pursued the cause of equal rights for African Americans. It's called the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Created the machinery to end all segregation and discrimination in workplaces and in all public places. Then the Voting Rights Act, I believe, of 1964, made it easier for African Americans to vote in southern states. So it all started when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus because African Americans in public transportation had to sit at the back of the bus. That's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. giving his famous I Have a Dream speech. Again, you will largely get more of this next year, but we like to touch on it in world history. This is his I think one of his protest marches. He's right here. These are sit-ins where at lunch counters, African Americans were not allowed to eat or sit at the lunch counter. And so these are Southern, this is obviously in the South, where white people are harassing protesters. Again, here's some police brutality. This is Lyndon B. Johnson signing his act. Martin Luther King. 60s, 70s, and 80s. So laws alone could not guarantee the great society that Johnson talked about creating, but he soon faced bitter social unrest. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. would be assassinated. Riots following broke out in more than 100 cities, including D.C. The riots will lead to a white backlash where whites became less sympathetic to the cause of racial equality and continued the racial division in the United States. Anti-war protests also divided the U.S. as some Americans turned against the Vietnam War. The combination of anti-war demonstrations and riots in the cities caused many people to call for law and order. This was the appeal used by Richard Nixon, the Republican presidential candidate in 1968. With Nixon's election, a shift to the political right in American politics began. As president, Nixon used illegal methods to gain information about his opponents. This led to what is called the Watergate scandal. And after lying to the American public about his involvement in the affair, secret tapes of his conversations in the White House revealed the truth. On August 9, 1974, Nixon resigned rather than face possible impeachment. In 1976, election of the former governor of Georgia, Jimmy Carter, became president. A crisis erupted when the Iranian government of the Ayatollah Khomeini held 52 Americans hostage. Carter's inability to gain the release of the hostages contributed to his loss to Ronald Reagan in the 1980 election. All that happened. So here you have a political cartoon of, you've got one Abraham Lincoln way back when in 1963 or 1863, and then you have the voting rights in 1964, 100 years later. This is following the assassination of Martin Luther King right here. Uh, the KKK will come alive back again in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Again, white. It was white and colored, separate but equal. Here are some war protests. Again, you're gonna get a lot of this next year. This is the Watergate Hotel. Impeach Nixon. That's Jimmy Carter. These are the hostages of the Iran hostage crisis. And that's Ronald Reagan, former governor of California. Canada, eh? So after the war, Canada began developing electronic, aircraft, nuclear, and chemical engineering industries on a large scale. Under Lester Pearson, the Liberal government laid the groundwork for Canada's welfare state. A national security system and health insurance program were soon enacted. When Pierre Trudeau became prime minister in 1968, he supported a vigorous program of industrialization. He was also dedicated to preserving a united Canada, and at the same time, he acknowledged the rights of French-speaking Canadians. His government passed the Official Languages Act, allowing English and French to be used in federal civil service. That's Pearson. This is the 5 principles of the Canada Health Act. That's Trudeau. Dub society. So, after World War II, Western society witnessed a rapid change. New inventions like computers, televisions, jet planes altered the pace and nature of human life. Post-war, Western society was marked by a changing social structure, especially changes in the middle class. Traditional middle class groups were made up of business people, lawyers, doctors, and teachers. And a new group of managers and technicians hired by large companies and government agencies now joined this new middle class. Changes also occurred for the lower classes. The shift of people from rural to urban areas continued, and the number of people in farming declined drastically. By the 50s, the number of farmers in most parts of Europe dropped 50%. The number of industrial workers declined as white-collar workers increased. At the same time, noticeable increase in the real wages of workers made it possible for them to intimate the buying patterns of the middle class. This led to what some observers have called the consumer society, as buying on credit became widespread in the 50s because they weren't afraid of it since the 1920s. Workers can now buy such products as televisions, washing machines, refrigerators, and stereos. So that's suburbia. Inventions in the 50s, you have the credit card, liquid paper, which is whiteout, automatic coffee pots, transistor radio, a solar cell, microwave oven, television remotes, a 3-point seatbelt, super glue, and non-distortion windows. 60s, I'm not going to name them all, but you can tell inventions galore during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. All right, well, let's talk about women. Women's participation in the world wars resulted in several gains as they achieved one of the aims of the 19th century feminist movement, the right to vote. During World War II, women had entered the workforce in huge numbers at the war's end. However, they were removed to provide jobs for soldiers returning home. For a time, women fell back into traditional roles. Birth rates rose, creating a baby boom in the 40s, late 40s, and the 50s. By the end of the 50s, the birth rate began to fall, and with it, the size of families. The structure of the workplace increased in Europe and the United States. These women, especially working class women, faced an old problem. They still earn less than men for equal work. Many faced the double burden of earning income and raising a family. Such inequalities led to increasing numbers of women to rebel. In the 60s came a renewed interest in feminism and the women's liberation movement. In the 60s and 70s, the women's movement emerged in the U.S. and quickly spread to Western Europe. Supporters of the movement wanted to change the basic conditions of women's lives. And the U.S. Passed the Equal Pay Act in 1963. It required women to be paid the same as men for performing the same work. But is that true to this day? A controversial issue would arise, and that is abortion in 1973, and the U.S. Supreme Court legalized abortion in the court case Roe versus Wade. Although national health insurance covered abortion in most of Europe, the procedure was still debated The procedure was still debated in the United States. Here you have all these babies being born, women in the workplace, students. A growing discontent among university students led to an outburst of student revolts in the late 1960s. Many protests were an extension of the revolts in American universities, often sparked by the student opposition to the Vietnam War. Some students, particularly in Europe, believed that universities failed to respond to their needs or the realities of the modern world. Others became that they were becoming small cogs in the large and impersonal bureaucratic wheels of the modern world. Here are some student protests. Ah, oh, hello. Let's stop that. Hold on. You know me, not prepared. Okay. Let's see. I got the book and opened it up. Chapter 15. So your homework is to do page 562 through 4. Page 562 through 4. So yeah, hopefully you guys did enjoy that. We're back at it, chapter 15, Cold War. So hopefully you guys did enjoy that. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, comment, leave a like, subscribe. I don't know how to do my outro. This is my first video I've been making in a year. So, all right, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bird.